So here's the deal, everybody. We just absolutely love producing as much content as possible for Film and Whiskey Nation. But if our regular episodes aren't enough for you, then you can head on over to patreon.com/filmwhiskey, sign up for one of our memberships, and you will get a slew of extra content for your listening pleasure. Check us out on patreon.com/filmwhiskey.
Hey, want to make a podcast? Spotify's got a platform that lets you make one super easily, then distribute it everywhere and even make money. All in one place for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters, and here's how it works. Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer, so no matter what your setup is like, you can start creating today. Then you can distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard. Hey, even video podcasts are available on Spotify, and you can do cool things like Q&As and polls at the end of each of your episodes to get people interacting with you on Spotify. With Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions. And best of all, it's totally free with no catch. We've been using Spotify for Podcasters. Anchor has now rebranded into Spotify for Podcasters, so it's been totally integrated, it works perfectly, and we're distributed all over the world because of it. Try Spotify for Podcasters today.
Priceline presents Go to Your Happy Price. What's up? It's Kaylee Cuoco. When it comes to travel, we all have a happy place. You can see yourself already there. It's beautiful. It might be sunny and sandy for some, neon and urban for others, deserts or rainforests or hiking trails. With Priceline, you can get to your happy place for a happy price with deals you really can't find anywhere else. Like up to 60% off select hotels to Costa Rica or 5-star hotels for 2-star prices in Cabo. Go to Priceline.com and travel to your happy place for a happy price. All right, see ya. I'm off to Miami. No, actually, wow, look at that. No, I'm going to Hawaii now. Ooh, Cancun looks nice. You know what? Belize looks pretty nice this time of year. Or, Palm Springs.
Go to your happy place for a happy price. Go to your happy price, Priceline.
In 2012, director Kathryn Bigelow and star Jessica Chastain gave the world a gritty manhunt biopic that culminates in the death of the world's most hunted man.
In 2023, we try a sourced bourbon that fittingly comes from an undisclosed location.
Ooh, the film is Zero Dark 30.
The whiskey is David Nicholson Reserve.
And we'll review them both. This is
the Film and Whiskey Podcast. Welcome to the Film and Whiskey Podcast, where each week we review a classic movie and a glass of whiskey. I'm Bob Book.
I'm Brad G.
And this week we are looking at 2012's Zero Dark 30. One of, objectively, the coolest sounding movie names of the last 25 years, Brad.
Oh, dude, there is something about the title that you're just like, I feel like I'm on SEAL Team 6 now.
I'm in. Yeah, I'm bought into the movie before anything else.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, directors can't underestimate a good title.
No. So this is our second film, speaking of directors, from director Kathryn Bigelow. Last week we looked at 2009's The Hurt Locker, or I guess 2008's The Hurt Locker. I don't know.
Yeah,
there's some controversy.
Who's to say?
Right. Go back and listen to that if you want us to suss out which year that was released in. But continuing on the controversy train, Brad, we're looking at Zero Dark 30, a movie that is not without controversy of its own.
I was going to say, I think it is universally beloved by military folks, the common public, the political figures in our world. Like, nobody had an issue with this movie.
No, not at all. I mean, it was basically like, this movie and It's a Wonderful Life are the ones that bring up the fondest memories for everyone.
Yeah, that's it, man.
All right, Brad, I have not sat down and counted, but this has to be like, I don't know, the fourth, fifth movie we've done from the year 2012 at this point. 2012 is one of the most slept on great movie years ever. And if you wouldn't mind, while I'm vamping, Brad, do me a favor, just Google real quick, Best Picture nominees from the 2013 Oscars.
I'm on it.
Because it is just a really, really great list of movies.
All right, so 2013 Oscars, we have Argo, Amour, Beast of the Southern Wild, Django Unchained, Les Miserables, Life of Pi, Lincoln, Silver Linings Playbook, and Zero Dark 30.
So this is at least our fourth 2012 movie. I think we also did the 8th Harry Potter movie, which came out in 2012. There's probably another one floating around out there somewhere that I can't think of off the top of my head. But
is Amour the French movie that I hated?
That's the one that you do not like. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So a very significant movie year, you know?
Yeah, I would say so. I've actually seen every single movie on here except for Lincoln and Beasts of the Southern Wild.
Oh, man. Okay.
You
got to watch
like
Lincoln,
incredible.
Man. I would have expected that you would have seen Lincoln by now.
I was going to say, I've seen Amour, and I haven't seen Lincoln.
And not the Steven Spielberg movie of the bunch. I love it.
I mean, if I'm being honest with you, Bob, I think Amour was the first movie on this list that I saw, like chronologically in my life.
Wow.
So tell me that I'm not a cinephile, Bob.
True film bro, Brad G.
Bob, you never mentioned this is our 200th movie.
Brad, I totally forgot until just now. And here's the crazy thing is I've had this marked on my calendar and on our Google Sheet for months. You
should have written it on your hand.
This is our 200th regular episode of Film and Whiskey. I'm just I'm so grateful for this. I can't believe we've done 200 movies.
Yeah, I am blown away myself. I grew up watching movies and going to the theaters was, something of a pastime with my family. We probably did it once a month or so. And so to be able to sit down and take seriously the art of watching films and just have a blast with my best friend doing it for 200 episodes now, that's just really cool. And I'm really thankful for all of our listeners that continue to tune in to hear us ramble on about movies from Gone with the Wind to Zero Dark 30.
Honestly, I know this is going to sound super selfish, but at the end of the day, the drive of this podcast is I get to introduce one of my best friends in the world to something I love more than almost anything. And that is these movies. And the fact that I have I just feel like I've tricked you into doing that. I can't believe this has worked for 200 straight weeks, Brad. But
yeah,
you have gone from not having seen hardly any classic movies to probably more than 99% of the population at this point. And we've gone all the way back to movies in the 30s. We're going to look at silent movies here in a couple weeks. It's really cool to be able to continue to introduce you to these things and to see just how far we've been able to come in what we can talk about and the references that I can make that you now understand.
Yeah, I am rocketing up the percentile chart of movies watched among Americans. And I'm proud of myself, Bob. I'm kind of awesome.
You are kind of awesome, man. All right, man, let's get into talking about Zero Dark 30 a little bit. And in order to do that, we have to throw over to our first segment of the day, which we call Brad Explains.
Brad's gonna give us the movie plot with only 60 seconds ticking on the clock. So let's go ahead and hear your take with this little segment that we call Brad Explains.
Brad Explains is the part of the podcast where Brad breaks down the plot of the film that he has just seen, often for the first time. Brad, was this your first time with Zero Dark 30?
Sure was.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, very first time. I'd never seen it. It's one of those movies that I was always intrigued by, partially because, the hunt of Osama bin Laden, I wouldn't say it was a formative part of our life, but we were 10 when the Twin Towers fell.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore we were, around 20-ish when he got caught.
Yeah.
And so...
Hey, spoiler alert, he didn't get caught.
Well... I mean, they caught him with a bullet.
Yeah, very, very, very different than what happened with Saddam Hussein. You know what I mean? It's a different kind of catch. But yes, to your point, I understand what you're saying. I'm just surprised that this is your first time seeing it because of the three films in the Kathryn Bigelow bunch here, I would have thought this would be the one that had come across your radar a little quicker.
Yeah, no, I like I said, it's been on my radar for a while, but just never got around to it. And I will say, after watching it, I sat down and watched Obama's 10-minute speech on catching him and read a few articles about, some of what was going on in the president's cabinet as they were making decisions. And it definitely struck me about what a huge moment it was in our society when he was killed.
Yeah, for sure. All right, Brad. Well, now you have to break down the plot of the movie. The way that this works is that we put 60 seconds on the clock for Brad to explain the whole plot of the film. If he doesn't make it through, we just cut him off and things are left just on a cliffhanger. If you've not seen Zero Dark 30, something tells me you already know how it ends. So I'll give mild spoiler warnings, but the spoilers are public knowledge. So folks, if you go watch the movie. But this is probably the first time in a few weeks, Brad, that I would say you can get the movie spoiled for you and listen to us talk about it before you watch the movie. And I think you could still enjoy it. Yeah,
100%. The movie obviously does not key. It's not an M. Night Shyamalan movie. We'll just say that.
All right, Brad, you have 1 minute on the clock and go.
Zero Dark 30 is a movie about a CIA analyst played by Jessica Chastain named Maya and her hunt for Osama bin Laden. And her hunt for Osama bin Laden. It follows her from her early days in the CIA as she is squeamish about torture, all the way through to the very end as she's being attacked in her Pakistani embassy, and her willingness to go to every length possible to find and kill Osama bin Laden. Mm-hmm. I don't know what else to say, Bob.
No, not really. I mean, that's the plot of the movie.
It's about her, and she has a drive to find and kill him. Well, have somebody else find and kill him. She'll find him.
Or in Brad's terms, catch him.
Catch him. Have you ever seen the Bad Man college humor videos?
Oh, yeah.
There's the one where he's talking about how he doesn't kill
anybody.
Guys.
Yeah.
They just go to sleep. That's what they did with Osama.
That's on the historical record at this point.
Yeah.
All right, man. I think maybe the place to start is comparing this directly to the film that we just came out of, which is The Hurt Locker. And I think it's very clear, just looking at this movie, the scope of this movie is just enormous compared to The Hurt Locker.
Yeah, and it's a decade-long film.
And just, the cast is incredibly stacked. You can see the budget on the screen. I always love it when a filmmaker's next movie gets a much bigger budget. It's almost like when I watch the first Godfather and then The Godfather Part 2. And you're like, oh, this clearly had at least twice the budget. And, in the case of The Hurt Locker, it had between 4 and 5 times the budget. And I think just in looking at it, you can tell.
Yeah, that's what winning an Oscar will do for you, Bob. Yeah, no, you can definitely see you can see where the money goes. Mm-hmm. That's something we talk about every once in a while on the podcast. You can see the money in this. There's a lot more special effects, a lot more just big, showy scenes, and there's just a lot more movie to watch.
There certainly is. It's a long movie.
It's a really long movie, man. And that's one of the detractions I would give this film is it's a little bit too long.
I have not watched this movie front to back since the first time I watched it, which I guess would have been in 2013 after the Oscars. But I gave it a 10 out of 10 at the time. And I will say, life update, I'm not giving this movie a 10 out of 10 now.
Bob, I was really worried that we were going to come into this and I was going to give it an 8 or something. And you'd be like, what are you doing?
No, I mean, I think I'm kind of in that range now, not to spoil my final scores, but it will definitely be taking a step back. It's not a perfect movie. It has some pacing issues for me, but I think even as I get into talking about pacing issues, the whole reason I brought up the comparison to The Hurt Locker is that in addition to being just massive in terms of scope and scale and ambition, it's also a completely different kind of movie. Mm-hmm. The fact that both of these movies are set in the Middle East is about the only thing they have in common from a narrative storytelling standpoint. I would put this movie in a completely different genre from The Hurt Locker.
I don't want to totally nitpick. Would we consider Pakistan the Middle East?
No, that's true. Are they ever in? Yeah, they're in Afghanistan at some point in the movie, right? Because they go to the CIA Black Ops base in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Anyway, there's Middle East elements. Dude, just, okay.
I like geography, man.
Fair point. What I'm trying to say is, I watched The Hurt Locker, and like, obviously, yes, it's a war movie, and this one's not a war movie, but it tells a very conventional narrative story. There is like a narrative arc, there's tension built, there's a resolution. This movie is much more episodic. And as I tried to like categorize what even is the genre of this movie, the only kinds of films that I can really compare it to are like journalist movies, like a procedural about like All the President's Men or Spotlight has a lot in common with the way this movie unfolds. It's just that instead of trying to break a story, they're trying to catch the world's most infamous criminal. But it has that same sort of almost like police procedural element to it.
Yeah, 100%. And yet it also has a bit of like a Jason Bourne movie. Like for me, the vibe of the lighting in the movie reminded me of the Bourne movies. And the way that they have like a gritty realism vibe to the foreign countries that they place their characters in, foreign if you are from the US, obviously, just felt very similar to me. I found myself often throughout the movie thinking that like this is a much more serious Jason Bourne-esque movie.
Yeah.
That's what really stuck with me in a good way. Like I think that the look and the feel of this movie are like I think it's the right tone that they should have struck, and B, like they kept it consistent throughout the entire film. And that was really well done.
I'm really glad you agree with me on this, because I was worried that we were going to end up getting in a debate about, like, when I looked at the genre of the movie online, it's categorized as a political thriller. And I feel like that's one of those kinds of genres that there's a huge umbrella for what you can call a political thriller. And that's everything from like
Manchurian Candidate.
Exactly. Like I'm being chased by, there's a conspiracy against me and it's an action thriller, all the way down to like this kind of, backroom political intrigue kind of thing, which
like
operates
an Aaron Sorkin West Wing.
Which operates on a much different kind of rhythm. And so, like, I guess just to kick things off here, my observation is this is a very different movie than The Hurt Locker.
Yeah, and it's fascinating how Bigelow is working in the same era of like history. Like she's making historical fiction-ish movies, and I don't know. I'm very curious why she, as a director, was drawn to this era. I mean, obviously, she's making these movies as the things are happening. Like Zero Dark 30 originally was supposed to be a movie about the failed manhunt for Osama bin Laden, and then they found him and killed him. They found and caught him.
They caught him.
And they completely rewrote the script to fit the catching of Osama bin Laden.
Do you think this is a good time to get into like the whole controversy, or should we save that for a little bit later?
Yeah, let's just get it out of the way.
Yeah, okay.
So they waterboard people. I will say, one of the best lines I've ever heard in a movie is when the CIA agent that trains Jessica Chastain in the field on how to torture people is leaving, and he's like telling her to be careful. He's like, times are changing. They're not letting us do what we need to do. And then he goes, you don't want to be the last one found holding the
dog collar.
The dog collar. And I'm like, oh, I don't like that.
Yeah,
but it's a great line.
The crazy thing is, like, that's not a euphemism. That's not a metaphor. That is, he's being literal.
It's describing what they did to prisoners.
100%.
And I will say,
go ahead.
In the movie, I have not read about what they actually did. I will just comment on what they portrayed in the movie. What they portrayed in the movie is effed up, bro.
Yeah, it's horrific. Well, and I was going to say, the funny thing is, this movie is so controversial that there are controversies off of the controversies. And when I said, like, let's talk about the controversy, I wasn't even thinking about the torture element of it, which in itself was very controversial. And a lot of people, movie critics that did not like this movie, really went in on it and basically said, essentially, the arc of the story is if not for the torture of these prisoners, we would not have caught Osama bin Laden, right?
Yeah.
We being Americans, right? We are Americans. Sorry, I'm using the formal we here.
Yeah, I think you mean Americans.
Yes, exactly. But so the point they're essentially making is whether Kathryn Bigelow and the screenwriter Mark Boal understand it or not, they're essentially condoning what's being portrayed on screen. And so it became this big back and forth with Mark Boal saying, like, you're misreading the film if that's what you think. But I mean, those elements are there. And the controversy, Brad, that I was referring to, though, is the fact that this movie essentially ends up getting accused of stealing CIA secrets. That, like, how could they have known how this operation went down less than a year after it happened, unless somebody was feeding them information about it? And so, Mark Boal has come out and said, like, where he got his information from. And then the funny thing is, like, after the movie comes out, it's getting investigated. They opened a Senate investigation against this movie to figure out how they got their information. And at the same time, they're investigating it for stealing CIA secrets. There's a whole section of Congress, especially people like John McCain, Dianne Feinstein, who are accusing the movie of being grossly inaccurate. So it's like, okay, well, if they stole secrets, then they clearly didn't use them because you're saying none of this happened. So, like, it was caught in between all of these kind of hot button controversies. It came out in an election year. People accused it of trying to be released so that it would influence the people in favor of voting for Obama, even though it hardly mentions Obama. It really just did become a political lightning rod for a few months there.
And yeah, that's interesting, Bob, because technically this movie was supposed to come out in 2012, but it ended up coming out in really early 2013 because they didn't want to affect the election, I guess.
I think it's giving this movie a lot of credit to assume that, like, so many people are going to go see this movie and attribute all of this to Barack Obama that it will sway an American election.
Yeah. Well, and if we're being honest, like, at the end of the day, Barack Obama was the president who gave the order to go kill him.
100%.
So, like, giving credit where credit's due, and, like, that's fine. Like, he was the president. It's whoever is the quarterback of the team gets the W or the L.
Yep.
Like, so if Obama gets the W for that, then he gets the W for that. That's, I don't know. That just seems like a silly talking point. Mm-hmm. But I know we're talking about American politics where nothing is silly and everything is important. Mm-hmm. So, You know what, Bob? We should probably just talk about politics this entire episode.
I was actually hoping that we could just pivot the show to, like, film and politics.
Oh, no.
Politics and whiskey. Yeah, it's got to be. Yeah, okay.
There we go.
There it is.
In the logo, we'll get rid of the film reel and just put an American flag.
Or like the judicial scales.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah,
Statue
perfect.
of Liberty.
Yes. All right, man, let's talk about the movie itself. And I want to start with Jessica Chastain because it's her movie. Jessica Chastain is such an interesting case study in stardom because she was, a working actress. She had been in a few movies. Like, in 2010, she comes out with this movie called The Debt, where she plays a supporting role. And so, like, she's working her way up through, the food chain in Hollywood. And she makes
I love the phrase working actress, though, as if, like, Meryl Streep isn't working. She's just, like, floating on clouds around the set.
Meryl Streep is gigging at this point. She doesn't need steady work. Come on.
That's true.
So Chastain films, like, 6 or 7 movies that all, like, some of them get shelved for a few months. Some of them get rushed into post-production. And in the year 2011, she has 6 movies come out. And, like, at least 4 of them are either, like, really beloved by critics or become really big hits. So she makes a movie with Ralph Fiennes that he directs. It's an adaptation of the Shakespeare play Coriolanus. She's in the movie Take Shelter with Michael Shannon, which is, a phenomenal movie. I love that film. She makes The Tree of Life, where she is, like, co-starring opposite Brad Pitt in a Terrence Malick movie.
And Sean Penn.
And Sean Penn. Don't forget him. And then the one that really kind of puts her on the map is the movie The Help. The Help gets nominated for a bunch of Oscars. I believe she gets nominated for Best Supporting Actress for The Help. And so from relative obscurity to the end of that year, she's, like, one of the biggest names in Hollywood. And then what does she have coming out the following year? Oh, just Zero Dark 30. Like, it's so crazy to think how quickly this kind of thing can happen.
Yeah.
And Chastain, like
Interstellar just a year or two later.
Yeah, exactly. Like, she had a really nice run there for a while. And, you know, she finally has won her Oscar just a little over a year ago for the movie The Eyes of Tammy Faye. It's just crazy because I feel like she's been a fixture in Hollywood for so long, but there was a time when from one year to the next, nobody knew her. And then she was, you know, the hottest thing in town.
Yeah. Stardom thrust upon her quickly.
It's what's going to happen to us, baby.
That we're gonna hit the big time, Bob. Man, what does the big time even look like for a podcast?
Not Jessica Chastain's career. I can tell you that much.
Okay, we're not gonna be making millions of dollars.
If we couldn't hit the level of fame she had before 2011, we'll be like gods in the podcasting world.
Yeah, we probably would be, man. Well, here's to becoming gods of the podcasting world.
So Chastain in this movie. Pretty incredible, Brad.
Yeah, she, like you said, she is the driving force of this film. Like, her emotional engine keeps this thing moving. Mm-hmm. And boy, does this movie need it, because it is long. Like, I can't emphasize this enough, Bob. I checked, I try my hardest to not check where I'm at in a movie. Like, you're not meant to know it when you're sitting in the theater. There's nothing, you can't just like, you know, check to see how much time you have left. You can't put on subtitles. I've returned to a place where I try to watch movies as much like I'm in the theater as possible. This one, I checked at one point and I was like, oh dear God, I have an hour and 20 minutes left. I'm not even halfway. And I checked one more time and I was like, oh man, there's 53 minutes left. This is really rough, man.
I'm not going to lie to you, man. We'll get back to Chastain in a second. I did the same thing, like multiple times throughout this movie, because again, this is kind of, I don't want to say the downfall, but it is an inherent feature of this kind of episodic procedural movie. Mm-hmm. That because there's not a traditional narrative arc, even though there's kind of the built-in, like the hunt and then the catch at the end of the movie. So there is like a kind of arc, but it's so episodic and so stop-start and then, you know, one step forward, two steps back because of the nature of this case that you really can't tell how far you are into the movie at any point. And it seems very endless and repetitive. And again, that's the nature of what it was like to do this. However, you know, I got like a half hour into the movie and I couldn't remember if all of the torture stuff was just like an extended prologue to what was going to happen. And it's like, no, it's not really a prologue. It's just like one chapter of this film. And then she goes off and does another thing. And then she gets shot at by some people. And then she's with SEAL Team 6. And I don't know, man, I'm with you. And I hit the point where there's that assassination attempt on her, one of many, where she's getting shot at, you know, and she has to like drive backwards behind that gate. And I pressed pause. And it was like at the hour and a half-ish mark.
Yep.
I was like, oh, there's still a full hour left in this movie. And I feel like I've been watching it for at least 2.5 hours.
Yeah. It's pretty much the same as the ending of The Return of the King. Mm-hmm. Like, like it's episodic. There's like 7 different episodes to the ending. And every single one is better than the last.
So back to Jessica Chastain.
Let's get back to Jessica for a second. I think what makes her work as a character is the way she slowly unravels throughout the movie. That at the very start, you have a fresh-faced, like right out of school recruit who, you know, shows a lot of promise. And by the time you get like 45 to 60 minutes into the film, you hear her asking prisoners the same questions that her trainer was asking and using the same phrases. And you're kind of like, oh, she's like in now. She's bought into what they're doing. And then from there, you see the physical transformation happen. And she gets, you know, her hair gets more and more unkempt and she doesn't care quite as much about her makeup anymore. And you see her kind of slowly lose it throughout the film. And I think that's the thing that keeps the film moving, is how her emotional energy becomes more ragged as the film goes further and further along.
Well, yeah, and I think the great thing about it is that they kind of establish at the beginning of the film that this is all she has. This is all she does. She has no life outside of this. We never find out her last name, and that's because this is a fictional character. Based on real CIA operatives, but we only know her as Maya, and anyone only knows her as Maya. I don't think they ever use a last name for her in this movie. And it gets to a point where one of her colleagues asks her, "Do you have any friends?" And she just doesn't answer. And it's pretty obvious that she doesn't. And so when you get to the end of the film, and Brad, I love the ending of this film. And that last shot of the movie has stuck with me for, 11 years now. It's this 45 probably second shot that is just a close up on her face because they've killed bin Laden and they put her on a plane. And the guy says like, "Hey, you must be pretty important. You're the only person here." So it's echoing her isolation. And then he says, "Where do you want to go?" And she has no answer. And the plane starts to kind of just meander down, the taxiway, and she's crying and she's understanding like, where do I go from here? Kathryn Bigelow in an interview was talking about how she loved this ending because she wanted the audience to understand that this is not just where do I go from here, but where do we go from here? Like, as Americans, we were hoping that someday we could catch and or kill Osama bin Laden. And then it happened and it's like, okay, well, what now? There's still this emptiness. There's still this loss that we feel from 9/11, and that void has not been filled. And so she's a really great representation of that. And I think Chastain just freaking knocks it out of the park in that scene, man.
Yeah, she does. I mean, honestly, it reminds me a ton of the ending of The Social Network, where like you're just sitting with the character and it's like, all right, we just accomplished all this stuff. We did all these great things. But who am I at the end of this? Like, what's next? What am I going to turn into? And I think that's like probably one of my favorite, I don't know, I'm going to call it a trope. Like, one of my favorite tropes from Hollywood is like, okay, we obviously made this movie about a specific event because that's what's interesting. But as with everybody's life, there's going to be really interesting parts of our lives, but those times are going to end. Like, at a certain point, the honeymoon, if you get married, your honeymoon ends and you go back to work and you learn how to live with your now spouse. And like the rest of time is trying to figure out, okay, what do we do next? And I think that's a really important question that we should be asking ourselves as human beings that a lot of times I try to run away from. I don't want to think about like the boringness of life in day-to-day life, but movies like this kind of force you to reckon with that of like, okay, this important thing ended. Who am I? Where am I going? What am I doing? And what's next?
You're absolutely right though, man. Like the subgenre of movie that is, ambiguous ending where the character is now morally lost and doesn't know where to go from here.
Yeah.
Is like, because obviously it reminded me of the end of Up in the Air because it's set on a plane. But that, when the pilot finally comes out and tells George Clooney, like, you're in the Diamond Club now or whatever, where do you want to go? And he just doesn't know what to say. And then the movie ends with him looking at that board of departures at the airport and just being like, one of the lights that you see above you tonight will be my wingtip. And you just don't know where he's going to go from here. Yeah. And I love movies like this, man, because it's always like just such a gut punch to end the film. And like I said, man, Chastain gets nominated for Best Actress for this movie, and she absolutely deserves it. It's a great performance.
Yeah. Do you know who won that year for actress?
Who won that year for actress?
It might have been Jennifer Lawrence.
Oh, yeah, for Silver Linings Playbook.
Yeah. Which I have seen. I think I'd lean towards Chastain in this.
Oh, I agree. 100%.
Yeah. Or Emmanuel Riva in Amour, obviously.
Yes. She also gets caught at the end of that movie. All right, Brad, it's time for us to hit pause at this point because this is going to go off the rails very quickly if we don't stop here. Let's drink some whiskey, man. It's time we get into this David Nicholson Reserve. What do you say?
She got caught with a pillow. Bro, you got me good with that. Let's go drink some whiskey.
All right, so today we are checking out David Nicholson Reserve. This is a 100 proof bourbon whiskey that comes to us from the Luxco company, also known as Lux Row. Luxco built a distillery back in, I think, 2017, 2018, 2019, somewhere in there, called Lux Row. They are
2020, 2021, 2022. Who knows?
Who's to say?
Who's to say?
They produce one of our favorite lines of whiskey, which is Rebel Bourbon. Near and dear to my heart, my favorite brand of whiskey, pound for pound on the market. And this is another of their sourced products. So they didn't start distilling their own stuff until just a couple years ago. They have been rumored to have just the best relationship with Heaven Hill. Most of their sourced stuff reputedly comes from Heaven Hill. And this is among those. So David Nicholson is a brand that was apparently very regional, and it has like a kind of a BS marketing story behind it of like, oh, this man made his own whiskey and passed his recipe down for generations. And so they took this brand that was, I think, in the St. Louis region. They expanded it to national distribution, and they're sourcing likely Heaven Hill whiskey to do it. There's two whiskeys bottled under the David Nicholson label. One is called, I believe, 1843. That is a wheated bourbon. And then there is the David Nicholson Reserve, which is what we're drinking today. This is a high-rye bourbon, Brad. But again, we have no idea where it comes from. Wink, wink. We have no idea what the mash bill is for real. So that's all I have to say about it, Brad.
I like that your caveats are wink, wink, and for real. Keeping it classy here at the Film and Whiskey Podcast.
This might be a first for the season, Brad. You and I are both trying this live. Usually you drink yours before we hit record. I like to just kind of do mine in the moment and just kind of feel nice and loose about it. But we're both doing this right now in the moment. I'm nosing this, and I really love the nose on this, man.
Yeah, I think it's a really solid nose. For me, it's a little bit nutty. There's some cherry that comes through, a little bit of like an allspice. And then like the longer I've sat with it, the more you get some of those caramel and vanilla notes coming out. I think it's pretty solid, not complex enough for me to give it a high score, but I'll give it a 7 out of 10.
This is a complete aside, but right now I'm tasting out of a mini Glencairn, a wee Glencairn as they're called.
A wee Cairn.
It's what we got when we went to the Kentucky Bourbon Festival last year, Brad. And my aside is to ask you this. Have you noticed a difference in the taste when you drink out of a regular-sized Glencairn versus the wee Glencairn?
I'm going to be really snobby for a second, Bob. I don't drink whiskey out of anything other than a Glencairn.
Well, this is the Glencairn. It's just mini-sized, man.
Yeah, that's not a Glencairn, Bob.
It's like all those pictures of like when Andre the Giant would have like a beer can in his hand. That's what I feel like right now with...
Yes, 100%.
So anyway, I say all that because the notes that I'm getting on the nose of this are very different than the ones you're getting. And I'm getting a lot more of the brighter fruity notes. There's a ton of green apple on this for me. And I actually got a really specific candy memory. And it's those sweet tarts, like the chewy sweet tarts that have like the inside of them is white.
Those are the best.
There's like a very specific, almost sour, powdery fruitiness to this that I really, really dig. The only thing is, for being a reportedly high rye bourbon, I get almost no rye on this nose.
Yeah, I don't get it either, Bob. I do have a question for you. Do you own a Glencairn?
Oh, I own like 15 Glencairns.
Then why aren't you drinking out of one of those?
Because, dude, it's just next to my computer. Damn.
I'm just curious. I'm like, if you had like two and they're both in the wash, sure, but...
All right, let me go get a Glencairn while you vamp and give a score.
Oh, man. So, yeah, so the palette here is really interesting. For me, it dives very heavily into the world of cherry, and I'm honestly not getting very much rye at all. Like, Bob, I know that you said that this is a high rye bourbon, but for me... It's almost like a cherry cordial, like a chocolate cherry cordial. There's a little bit of vanilla that pops in. It's nice and creamy. I like this flavor a lot. I'm a little annoyed that it's a high rye and I'm not getting really any rye because I like rye a lot. I think I'll give it a 7.5 on the taste. It's solid. I like what's going on here. but nothing that's like really standing out for me.
This is by far our most chaotic whiskey review of all time. I really did get up and go get a Glencairn. And so I came back when you were halfway through talking, and I heard chocolate cherry cordial. That was the first thing I heard. Now, I'm still nosing this, and I get that a lot in a Glencairn. It's like milk chocolate with that kind of sickly, syrupy, sweet cherry thing inside of it. I will say, Brad, neither of us actually gave this a score on the nose yet. So
I did. I give it a 7.
You gave it a 7. All right. I'm going to give it a 7.5 on the nose. I'm going to take a sip so that I can finally give it a taste score. But to prevent our listeners from being bored listening to me smack my lips, go ahead and give it your finish score, and then I'll come in and give taste and finish.
For me on the finish, it kind of... Sours is not the right word. Sours is a very specific feeling that you know it when you taste it. I feel like when whiskeys are overly oaked, they kind of sour at the end. That's not what's happening here. I guess Bob, that when you described it as that kind of sickly, sweet cherry interior, I feel like that is just lingering on my palate. And I'm not a huge fan. I think I'll give it a 6 out of 10 on the finish.
So on the taste, everything you got, I'm getting. Like I get the milk chocolate. I get the whole cherry cordial thing is really prominent here. There's a little bit of vanilla, but it's almost like an artificial vanilla extract for me. A lot of that fruitiness went away, and it is kind of in that more milk chocolate range. When you go to swallow and on the finish, it's got a ton of oak and char on it, like a lot. And Brad, I don't know if it's just that, like, you know, I kind of took a break from drinking whiskey in the month between seasons, but I feel like, I don't know, like 5 or 6 of the 9 whiskeys we've had at this point have had that really, really strong oak char character to them. And I will say that among them, this one doesn't lean into just like, hey, cigarette ash on your tongue. This one, it has that, but then it kind of undercuts it with that sickly, syrupy, sweet cherry, so that it almost in the balance ends up tasting kind of like the lingering aftertaste of like Robitussin. Like a little bit sweeter, though. I don't hate it. And I really thought that I would. I'm going to give it a 7.5 on the taste. I'm going to give it a 7 on the finish.
Yeah, honestly, this weirdly reminds me of the Nomad Outland, just not as good. like the Nomad Outland had a weirdly sweet cherry flavor to it, and it was incredible. This one feels similar, but just doesn't quite pull it off as well. I think for balance, I'll give it a 6.5. Like there are some good flavors going on here. I just don't know if they're all mixing super well, especially as I take a step back and just consider the flavors that are left on my palate. It's decent, but not great.
I'm also going to give it a 6.5 on balance. And I know that it sounds weird because I gave each component a higher score than this. But I think when you take the sum of the parts, it ends up being less than each of them. You know what I mean? Like it's just an okay whiskey. It's pretty good. On second sip, that finish gets a little bit more bitter and a little bit less palatable. I'm not going to go back and amend my finish score, but in terms of overall balance, I think the whole experience, you know, taken as a cohesive whole is just a 6.5 for me.
Yeah, it's a little bit disappointing. When you come to value, this bottle can be sold in the state of Ohio for $40. And Bob, this isn't a $40 whiskey.
No, it's not. I mean, here's the thing. Like, if we knew a little bit more about it, maybe we could justify the price a bit. Like, how old is this whiskey? We don't know. I mean, it's got to be at least 4 years old because I don't see an age statement on this bottle. But, you know, if it was like a 6 to 8 year bourbon, I'd be like, okay, $40 makes more sense. It's 100 proof. So, like, I get that, but it's not bottled in bond. It's just 100 proof. So that tells me that they're blending a whole bunch of stuff together to come out with this. And at that price point, you can get a lot better stuff for $40. I think when it first came out, it was retailing at $35, and that made it kind of like this is something different from Lux Row.
It's at an approachable price.
I don't mind paying a little bit more to get something kind of off the beaten path. But at $40, it's just a little bit, it has better competition. I'm going to give this a 5.5 on value.
Yeah, I give it a 4.5 on value.
Wow.
Bob, my total is coming out to a 31.5 out of 50.
Brad, I'm at a 34 out of 50, so we're only coming out to a 65.5 out of 100, or a 32.75 out of 50. I think that's a pretty accurate score, honestly.
Yeah.
It's like right at the point where it's not bad. It's not a bad whiskey. I just don't think I'm going to recommend it because it doesn't really do anything to stand out, whether it's on the nose, the taste, the finish. There's no real component of this that I would recommend to somebody, even if it's not a bad whiskey.
Yeah, I would put it in the category of like a C plus whiskey that you don't need to spend $40 on, and you don't need to spend $6 on it for a pour at the bar either.
Yeah, I mean, it's like it's a 2.5 star movie. You know, it's like you don't really regret spending your money on it, and it was pleasant enough, but you know that by the time you get home, you're going to forget about it. Just one of those.
Yeah. Go drink Rebel.
Go drink Rebel every day, all day, every day.
Yeah, man. I won't say that I'm disappointed. Like it was fine. But I'm with you. I'm not going to recommend it.
All right, Brad, let's get back into talking about Zero Dark 30. What do you say?
Let's get to it. All right, everybody. That was David Nicholson Reserve, a whiskey that you can reserve spending your money on. But Bob, you know what it's time for right now. It's time for Bob's Checkbook's favorite segment, our Patreon plug.
Oh, plug in the Patreon.
Plug in the Patreon. Guys, if you like what we're doing here at the Film and Whiskey Podcast, and you want to spend some of your hard-earned money our way, we absolutely love you guys. We love producing this content, but it isn't free. As everybody knows, we try to bring the best possible material to you guys. And so we have a Patreon. Mm-hmm. If you want to check it out, it's patreon.com/filmwhiskey. There are 3 different tiers, $3, $5, and $7 a month. At each tier, you get some pretty cool stuff. There's bonus content. There's a channel on our Discord that is solely dedicated to our patrons, where we spend time every day talking to you guys. Mm-hmm. So if you want to check it out, go to patreon.com/filmwhiskey and consider, throwing a few bucks our way.
We really do try to give them as much content as we possibly can, too. We're making episodes specifically for them. Brad, I've got a thing lined up with a PR company right now that's sending me digital codes for movies to give away. And, a couple months ago, we did do a giveaway for the broader public. But then there was also going to be a couple months where I'm like, hey, I have 5 copies of the new Dungeons and Dragons movie. I'm going to give them to patrons. You know what I mean?
Yeah, who wants it?
Exactly. So if you'd like some of these perks, consider joining us at patreon.com/filmwhiskey.
All right, Bob, that was your favorite segment. Now it's time for Canada's favorite segment, 2 Facts and a Falsehood.
Brad is gonna try to stump you, Bob. 2 are right and 1 is wrong. 2 facts and a falsehood.
2 Facts and a Falsehood is the part of the podcast where Brad presents 3 items to me as fact, one of which he has completely made up, and it's my job to figure out which one is the lie. Brad, there is, I feel like we both had to do at least some amount of research on this movie just to understand the context into which it was released. We both seem pretty familiar with the controversies surrounding it. So I'm really interested to see what you're going to pull out for your 2 Facts and a Falsehood.
Well, just you wait, Bob. They're pretty incredible. Fact number 1, the man who killed bin Laden, Robert O'Neill, wrote in his autobiography, The Operator, that the real-life CIA operative that Jessica Chastain portrays was the bravest woman he has ever met. Fact number 2, Jessica Chastain's character was based on a real-life CIA analyst who was single-minded in her devotion to finding bin Laden, but was actually killed in a raid on the U.S. Embassy in Pakistan before the job was finished. Fact number 3, Jessica Chastain's agents originally declined the role of Maya for her. Producer Megan Ellison, who had worked with Chastain on Lawless, gave Kathryn Bigelow Chastain's phone number so that she could personally offer the role.
Oh, interesting. I do remember reading that somebody had been identified as the source, or at least one of the sources, for Maya in this movie. I don't remember reading that she had been killed. So 2 immediately jumps out to me as a potential falsehood. Number 3 sounds pretty plausible. Number 1 definitely sounds plausible. Although I don't know the name of the guy who actually killed bin Laden, so maybe you made that up. Who's to say? I think I'm going to just go with my gut on this one, Brad, and say that 2 is the Falsehood, just because I don't remember reading that person had died.
Bob, you are 100% correct.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I'm telling you what, man, the victories this season have been hard fought and few and far between, so I will take one when I can get one.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is what, our 3rd season of doing 2 facts and a falsehood?
I think so.
Yeah, so I'm a seasoned veteran at this point, Bob. I'm not squeamish anymore about the torture that you put me through.
Yeah, there it is.
Yeah, I watched a few videos of Robert O'Neill, the gentleman who killed, or sorry, who caught Osama bin Laden. And he is a very interesting human being, and he I don't know. There's part of me that, we talked about the controversy earlier about, how were they able to find out the things they found out about what happened. This dude is just out there after I caught Osama, I picked up his 2-year-old son and gave him to his mom. And I'm like, oh, you're just allowed to talk about anything at this point.
It's funny you say that because, and I wasn't able to go far enough down the rabbit hole in researching this out, but I feel like the existence of this movie kind of accelerated how quickly they declassified this story. Because I remember every single person in SEAL Team 6 wrote a book at some point. It seemed like for a year, it was like they declassified it and then everybody wrote a book about SEAL Team 6 and what they did.
Yeah.
And I can't help but think that that's pretty much solely because this movie came out and they needed to either corroborate it or refute it. It's just interesting to me that a movie like this kind of drove policy in that way. Not policy, but you know what I mean? The classification of highly sensitive materials and whether or not the public would get to know any of it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as we know with Mr. Trump and Mr. Biden, the president could just declassify whatever he wants. Just anything and everything.
Willy-nilly.
Declassified.
Absolutely.
Willy-nilly. Osama bin Laden declassified.
All right, Brad, I think we should talk a little bit about the other actors in this movie. And it's going to be pretty quick because everybody kind of plays their small little role in what is essentially Maya's bigger story. But it's worth noting that a lot of these actors were either semi-famous or just getting famous. Chris Pratt, I vividly remember seeing the trailer for this movie in front of every important movie in 2012. And there's a moment where they clip out him saying you really think it's him? Osama bin Laden? And it's the way he says bin Laden. It is etched into my brain. I'll be on my deathbed. Yeah. Forgetting the names of everyone in my family, and I'll be thinking about Chris Pratt saying that stupid line. But I remember seeing the movie, and I didn't really know who he was at that point because I didn't watch Parks and Rec when it first came out. I caught up with Parks and Rec later, right before it ended. And so I didn't know Chris Pratt. Joel Edgerton, I had only seen in a couple movies to that point. I think Warrior had just come out a year before that, maybe. So I kind of knew Joel Edgerton. Mark Strong, the very famous British actor, I kind of recognized him as he's that tall British guy. But honestly, it was only people like Kyle Chandler and James Gandolfini that I even recognized in this movie. And now I go back and watch it and I'm like, oh, I recognize probably 13 people in this movie.
I go back and I recognize Chris Pratt and Jessica Chastain and Kyle Chandler because I watch Friday Night Lights. That's
okay. Hold on.
And Harold Perrineau, who was in Lost.
In Lost, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So the person I wanted to call out was James Gandolfini because I thought that we've never talked about him on this show, and it really sucks because he's one of our great actors and gone too soon. It was so good to see him pop up in a movie. And I love watching that guy act. But are you saying that you did not recognize James Gandolfini?
Bob, I'm looking at the cast on IMDb right now. He doesn't even pop up on the cast, the main cast list. You have to click see all to see James Gandolfini.
I mean, he has a very small role, but what I'm asking you is when you saw him on screen, did you know who he is?
No, I know what his name is. I couldn't pick him out of a lineup. I don't know what he's been in.
Oh my God, Brad. I'm not even going to say what, Brad. I'm so mad at you, right? Can you click on him, click on his IMDb And then you'll go,
I can't find it.
And then you'll go,
I'm like scrolling through the IMDb actor page.
Oh my God.
There's 112 results, and I can't find.
Every time I think that like
Duplass.
You've learned things by being on this podcast with me, you come back with like I don't know who Tony Soprano is. I don't know what the television show, the seminal piece of entertainment that is The Sopranos is. Like,
I mean, I've heard of The Sopranos.
Oh
I've
my
never
gosh,
watched
you
it.
blow my mind, man.
Why would I watch The Sopranos?
Oh my God. You know what? No, don't push me there today, Brad. We're not going. I just wanted to say I liked seeing James Gandolfini.
Is The Sopranos as good as Breaking Bad?
It is widely regarded, like along with Breaking Bad, as possibly the greatest television show ever made.
I mean, if it's right there with Breaking Bad, I'm sure to watch it.
Anyway, Brad, who are some other people in this movie that you would like to call out for their performances, however small they might be?
I really liked the British guy that you talked about. Doesn't he play kind of like the chief who she keeps writing on his window?
Yes, Mark Strong.
Thank you, Mark Strong. I liked him in this. I think that he does a great job of illustrating the like the plight of middle management where like he is 100% on Maya's side.
And trying hard. He's like he's like in Area 51 at one point and then flying back to Pakistan and she's just like angrily writing on his window.
Yeah, and like but he's like not allowed to show her that he's doing everything he can to get this investigated. Like he might not fully believe that bin Laden's there, but he knows something's up. And so I loved his performance because he just plays that middle manager role so incredibly well, where he's keeping her at bay and yet also fighting his butt off to try and get the stuff she's figured out investigated. Mm-hmm. So I really liked him a lot. I didn't like Chris Pratt. Like, he's just too fluffy for me to believe that he's on SEAL Team 6. Like, I don't know if that's like body shaming or something, but I'm just like looking at him. I'm like, well,
yeah,
I don't think he would, like Star-Lord level Chris Pratt could be on SEAL Team 6, but like Parks and Rec Chris and Pratt could not be on SEAL Team 6.
I'm not even going to go there with that one. But
who's Jason Clarke? Because I didn't like him.
Jason Clarke is an interesting actor because, like, he's in this movie. He's in one of the new Planet of the Apes movies. He does a few indie films that are like really well regarded. And then he's like poised to get really big, and then he just kind of doesn't. And I've always really liked him as an actor. I think he makes super interesting choices. And in this movie, he plays a very, I don't even want to know if I want to call him a complicated character, because he's kind of uncomplicated and very steely. But it's interesting to go back now, because when I first watched this, I was like, that guy is going to be a movie star. And it just like never really happened for him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think he's interesting in this. I think his most interesting moment is like completely overlooked. And it's when he disagrees with Maya in like the big briefing with Tony Soprano. Mm-hmm. And he says 60%, and like Maya kind of looks at him, and then they never talk about it again. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, that to me is a moment of character development, and it's just completely glossed over because they have to get finished with their 2.5 hour movie.
That's a great point.
And so I think that is kind of the stuff of why I think the pacing is off in this film, because you don't get enough character interaction between her and people they've established as important. Like even Coach What's-His-Face from Friday Night Lights, mm-hmm. like they just kind of get rid of him halfway through the movie, and he gets shipped off back to America, and you don't really see him again. And I'm like, why? Like I want to see Jessica Chastain like bounce off of people more often. That's when she's most interesting, and yet they keep taking people out of her way, and they finally put a CIA chief in charge of her that just says, "Yep, I learned that you should do whatever you want, so go for it." I'm like, okay.
Brad, I love it when I can tell that you're starting to get either upset with the movie or just kind of digging your heels in on a point that you've made, because you start doubling down on certain behaviors. And one of those behaviors is like, you're not even trying to say people's names anymore. Like, you just referred to Mark Strong as that British guy you mentioned, and you referred to Kyle Chandler as Coach What's-His-Face.
Well, I didn't remember his name.
Which is
Kyle
even
Chandler.
better, because not only did you not call him by his real human name, but the thing you actually associate him with, which is Friday Night Lights, you don't even remember his name from that. And you can't be bothered to look up either of those things. You just say, Coach What's-His-Name, and you know that I know who you're talking about.
Oh, Bob, I'm in the middle of a rant. I don't have time to be clicking through IMDb and remember what his name is in Friday Night Lights.
All right, man. Before we get out of here and before we pair this movie up with Let's Make It a Double, I want to talk really briefly about Kathryn Bigelow's directing style. So we're 2 movies in with her. We're going to throw it all the way back to 1992 with Point Break next week, which is a much more conventional, kind of in the vein of The Hurt Locker. It tells a much more conventional narrative story, and it is much more Hollywoodized in terms of its look and feel, even than The Hurt Locker is. And so I guess I'm wondering, Brad, after 2 movies, do you feel like you have a grasp on her style, on her themes, like on her visual sense as a director yet? Or do you think you need another movie to try to make that determination?
Yeah, I feel like it's hard to say that I would have a grasp on it because of how specific her first 2 movies are. Like, even though, yes, they are different genres, like 100%, Hurt Locker and this one, as you said at the top of this episode, are very different genred movies. And yet they are both about the same thing. They're both about the results of 9/11 and what America did in response to that. And so I feel like they're both similar enough in that sense that the idea that this woman also directed a movie about surfers who commit bank robberies, let's just say I'm intrigued to see the hard left turn we're about to take. Also, his name is Coach Taylor.
There it is.
You're welcome.
It was better when it was Coach What's-His-Face. So Kathryn Bigelow does not get nominated for Best Director in this year for Zero Dark 30, which I think is really fascinating. This was the subject, again, of some controversy. And I don't know if we've talked about this, Brad, but this was the year that Argo came out, and Argo goes on to win Best Picture. Ben Affleck, this was like his big comeback movie as a director, and people were starting to give him his flowers, and then he wins like the Directors Guild Award, and then for some reason he doesn't even get nominated for the Oscar. And that's kind of how Argo takes pole position at the Oscars, is that people were rallying around Ben Affleck and basically being like, well, if it's not going to win Best Director, like, let's give it Best Picture. And so I can't remember a year where there were 2 bigger omissions in the Best Director category, because I'm looking at the list now, and a couple of these people, I'm like, yes, I absolutely think they belong here. But to leave Kathryn Bigelow out of this, I think is kind of a staggering omission, because this is as well directed, if not better directed than The Hurt Locker was.
Yeah, I think it is. Well, I don't know if I think it is. I need to ponder that, Bob.
She should have at least been nominated, I guess is what I'm saying.
No, I'm with you. This is a high enough quality movie that it deserves a nomination. I think that 2010 was a weaker year for the Oscars. And so I think that makes sense that she would win that year as opposed to this year. Do I think that this is better directed than...
I just think when you think about like, she said they shot 2 million feet of film on this movie. And like all of the tiny little scenes that they had to do like an entire, get an entire crowd shot just for like a 5-second insert of somebody getting followed through a crowd, or all of the drone footage, all of the night vision footage, like the entire half-hour long assault on that complex is such a well-directed piece of action cinema. Like, I don't know, man. Like, I think sometimes we look at action movies, and especially movies like this that are very big in scope, and we don't really think about just how big the scope is. I have now seen, after last week, I have now seen the movie Top Gun Maverick 5 times in theaters, Brad. And I'm like,
that's quite a few times.
This is one of the best directed movies I've seen in a long time, and certainly one of the best edited, because there's just a mountain of stuff to stitch together. And the fact that it even can be coherent at the end of it, I think is like a miracle in itself. And I kind of feel that way with this movie too.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I think that I'm holding the length of the movie against it. But when you break down each individual sketch, if you will, and I will say the whole naming each statecraft,
I'm not a fan of that.
Not a fan at all. Like, honestly, I wish that they just put up the year. Like now it's 2006.
Yep.
Pakistan. That's where we are now. Like, that would have been much better. But when you look at each individual little vignette, they're pretty incredible, dude.
Yeah.
And I think this would be a movie worth watching in 2 sittings. And I feel like I would rarely say that, but this is one where, like, when you hit the end of one of the vignettes, like halfway through, I think it would almost be worth taking a night off and finishing it the next day.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. And I think that is a perfect segue into our final segment of the day, which we call Let's Make It a Double.
We're near the end of the episode, so thanks for listening to the Film and Whiskey Show. Let's pair another film with this one, even if it's a struggle. It's our final segment of the day, now let's make it a double.
Let's Make It a Double is the part of the show where we pick a movie to pair up with this one to make the perfect double feature. Brad, I'll let you go first, but I do think I have a couple of movies in mind for this one.
Man, I'm not going to lie. I think I'm pretty incredible at Let's Make It a Double. This week, I'm coming up short. I literally can't think of a movie that I'm just like, hands down, this is a perfect fit for this. As it is, I think I'm going to go with the Jason Bourne, the Bourne Identity. I do think that it is, the Bourne Identity is much more of a classic thriller drama type of movie, but I think that there's enough of the same blood running through its veins that it would make for a really fun night to go from this into a little bit lighter hearted Bourne Identity.
Yeah, man, I think it's a great pick. When I was watching this movie, once again, I was really blown away at what a matter-of-fact filmmaker Kathryn Bigelow is. Like, the way she shoots the action in this movie is very rarely, like, I don't want to say artistic, but it's not meant to be aesthetic. It's meant to be functional. And I think, once again, I said this last week, she reminds me a lot of Ridley Scott in the way that she shoots some of her action scenes. And Black Hawk Down, I think, is really like a pretty major influence on this movie. I'm not going to go with Black Hawk Down, though. I think the movie that would make the more interesting double feature is a movie by Steven Soderbergh called Traffic. This movie came out in the year 2000, and it is one of the first kind of like shaky cam movies, but it also tells this huge episodic anthology almost, and it's about the war against drugs in America and in the Mexican cartels, and it follows like 3 or 4 different groups of people. And I think that the way that movie is structured, the rhythm of that movie is so similar to Zero Dark 30. They tell completely different stories, but they're so similar like rhythmically that I think that would make a really, really interesting double feature.
Bro, I'm looking at the cast for Traffic. It is like peak 2000.
Oh, it's a great
Michael Douglas, Catherine Zeta-Jones, Dennis Quaid, like that.
Benicio del Toro, man.
Benicio, Don Cheadle. That's a lineup right there, man.
It's a good movie.
Yeah, I'm down. Let's watch it sometime.
All right, so that's what we have for Let's Make It a Double. Brad's going with The Bourne Identity. I am going with Traffic. And now it's time for our final scores. Brad, I don't think we need to belabor this point anymore. I'm going to give it an 8.5. I think that part of me wants to give it an 8, but I respect the swing of this movie, and I respect how much the sheer volume of this movie is so much greater than The Hurt Locker. And I think The Hurt Locker might be slightly more effective at what it's trying to do. But I also think that movies in this genre that we're identifying kind of have a ceiling for how entertaining they can be, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like a movie like Spotlight is a really well-made movie, but I'm not always like riveted by what's happening. It's more just like I appreciate the work these people went through to chase down their story. And I kind of feel like that with Zero Dark 30. I appreciate watching these people track a guy halfway across the world for 2.5 hours. So I'm going to give it an 8.5.
I'll give it an 8. I think that this is like a pretty entertaining. If I will say, Bob, the first 30 minutes of the film, they have like 3 torture scenes that each last like 8 minutes long.
Yep.
It's rough, dude. Like that was definitely a bit of a struggle for me. But once we got past that, I think the movie definitely moved along at a pretty good clip. Yeah, I think it's an 8 out of 10 movie.
All right, so we are coming out to an 8.25 out of 10, but we'd like to know what you think. Is Zero Dark 30 the better movie, or is The Hurt Locker? You can let us know on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or TikTok at Film Whiskey.
Or jump onto the Discord. We are on there every single day talking to you guys, the fans of the Film and Whiskey podcast. So if you want to join the conversation, you can find a link to our Discord at the end of every single one of our show notes.
Next week, we are rounding out our discussion of Kathryn Bigelow with just the most surfery movie of all time, Patrick Swayze, Keanu Reeves in Point Break. I'm excited for that one, Brad, because, spoiler alert, I have never seen it.
Oh, man, that's exciting.
Yeah, man, I'm pretty pumped for it. So we'll be back next week with Point Break, but until then, I'm Bob Book.
I'm Brad G.
And we'll see you next time.